Now this warm-up is extra credit, so if you're interested in doing it, you can do it for extra credit. But think about what would you look for in a president. Today's video is about presidential popularity and power. You will need to be prepared to take a short quiz in class, the next class, on all 3 homework videos that we have done so far. So make sure you review your notes and that you know what those 3 videos were about, the main concepts. Whenever you see a number, answer that question on a separate sheet of paper to turn in. You should be taking separate notes from those questions. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to describe the trends in presidential popularity over the duration of the president's tenure and explain the relationship between presidential popularity and power. So, first we'll look at presidential popularity over time. As you're looking at this, what you should see is that presidents usually come in with very high popularity and that it drops rather quickly. Now Truman, as we can see, his went up and down very wildly, but on the whole, most presidents go down and then they come back up, usually when they're getting re-elected. So every 4 years it goes back up. So as you can see, presidents start high and they head low. Now some presidents obviously have lower popularity than others. Here we can see Nixon at the end of his tenure was the lowest presidential popularity in history. Now we can sometimes see spikes. For example, George W. Bush actually started low, mainly due to the controversial nature of how he got elected, but then 9/11 happened and we see a spike, similar to his father, frankly. So, what you want to be looking at is trends, but the key trend, the trend you have to think about, is that presidents start high and then it lowers over time. So here are 2 questions you need to answer. Now 2 says, hypothesize how these trends could affect the president's ability to set the national legislative agenda. What you want to think about here is that part of the president's job is to give recommendations to Congress, as we learned about. But Congress has to have a reason to take on the president's agenda, to do what the president wants to do. One of the things that might make them want to do that is that they want to get reelected. If the president's popular, that usually would suggest that people like what the president wants, and therefore Congress might be more likely to do what the president wants because they want to also be popular so that they can win elections. So the key thing you want to remember is that popularity is not just like, oh, they like me, they like me. This is how these people keep their jobs. If they're not popular and they don't win their election, then they're not going to be there for very long, and they want to be there so they can influence laws and write laws and be a part of the government. Alright, we're now going to look at the relationship between presidential popularity and power. Here we can see George W. Bush, and we can look at what happened to his ratings. So remember what's going on right here, right in the end of 2001, September 2001. And then here, after February 2003, this was the invasion of Iraq. So one of the things we want to think about, especially when we're thinking about foreign powers of the president, is that a lot of times when a president declares war or gets our military involved in something, that actually goes with a spike in presidential approval ratings. So if something really bad happens, or if the president decides to take action somewhere, we usually see a spike in approval ratings. Of course, that would only happen if the people approve of the choice the president's making. Presidents serve as symbolic importance. So when there is a crisis, popularity for presidents almost always increases, even if they haven't done anything at all. So if we look at Franklin Roosevelt. He was elected in large part due to the Great Depression, and he helped make it better. But then Bush, right after 9/11, I mean, literally the next day, before he'd had a chance to do anything to be helpful in the events of 9/11, his popularity ranking went incredibly high. And then, Obama also had a high ranking at the beginning because he was viewed as someone who could do something about the recession. One thing to remember is that these popularity rankings come from polls, political polls. And polling is just when you ask or survey the public about their opinions and gather that data and then publish it. The idea is that the president unifies our nation. He is our leader, and so people tend to rally behind that symbol of the president in times of crisis and in times of need, when we want to rise to the occasion and be the great Americans we know we can be. Now, one thing you want to think about is how the media serves this role. The media are going to be the ones reporting on the crisis. The media are going to be how we know about it. And then the media are always going to turn to the president, and it's the president's chance to make an important statement, the president's chance to really drive home what they want. And so presidents use these crises as an opportunity to get what they want. Now, this doesn't mean that they're bad people, but it does mean they realize that during a crisis, their popularity is going to go up, and they can use that to get what they want done. After the Newtown crisis in the shooting, President Obama went up there. He made a speech. He got tons of media attention, and he used it as an opportunity to try to make Congress write gun control legislation. President Bush, on the other hand, after 9/11, used it as an opportunity to rally people behind getting involved in Iraq and Afghanistan. But mainly, Afghanistan was a no-brainer, but Iraq, much later, he used 9/11 as that chance. So you should be able to kind of talk about how the president can leverage, how he can use this popularity after a crisis to his advantage. Try to give one example in your answer, at least. Now we're going to look at the power of persuasion. Congress and the president fight, especially when we have a divided government. Remember, divided government is when either the presidency, the House of Representatives, or the Senate is controlled by two different political parties. So, for example, when Obama was first elected, we were actually a unified government because the president was Democrat, the House of Representatives had a majority of Democrats, and the Senate had a majority of Democrats. But then in 2010, Republicans managed to take control of the House of Representatives. So we've been divided since 2010, which is why elections are so important to everyone, even people who don't have to run for re-election. So the president now is a Democrat, the House of Representatives is Republican, and the Senate are Democrats. But you need all three branches to agree on a law to make it happen. So it's up to the president, in large part, to really persuade Congress to do what he wants. And this is not easy. He's got to get them on board with his agenda. If he wants to pass rules about gun control, or if he wants to get involved in Syria, Congress potentially needs to sign off on that. Though, as you know, when it comes to war, sometimes the president can get involved without Congress's permission, even though they technically have the power to declare war. Now, the more popular a president is, the easier it is for him to persuade Congress to adopt his agenda. This usually takes place at the beginning of the presidency, as we know, because that's when popularity is the highest. And as it drops down over time, as people become less happy with their presidents and realize that they're still only human and can make mistakes and might not do everything you want them to, then Congress usually gets a little more say in what's going on. Now, part of the reason that the president's popularity is so important to Congress is, again, it signals what the people in the United States want. And Congress potentially wants to be in the people's good graces so that they will vote for them again when it's time for them to run for re-election. But also they remember that the president has the power to veto. So even if they don't necessarily agree with what the president's doing, if he's really popular and will then use that popularity to veto bills that Congress writes, if they're not writing the kind that he wants, then they will consider doing that. So as we said, presidents with more popularity have an easier time persuading Congress. Congress is thinking about re-election and pays attention in the media. Often when president is first elected, they also get more seats in Congress. So what I mean by that is that usually when we see a Democrat win the presidency, then we see more Democrats in Congress than normal, which is what happened in both 2008 and 2012. And then when we see a Republican get elected, we see the exact same thing. They will get a spike. So it is kind of easier for the president in the beginning of his term to get more of what he wants passed and get his agenda met. Of course, this doesn't always happen. As we know, people can do what's known as splitting their ticket, which means they'll vote for the president as a Democrat, but then they'll vote for the senator, the Republican senator, and the Republican congressman. So it really depends on the people voting, and people don't always vote all for the same party anymore. All right, so that's that. I will see